I'm Nora, 44 years old, and the day my own family left me at the clinic changed everything I believed about love and loyalty. For most of my adult life, I thought of myself as the dependable one, the person everyone could count on, no matter the circumstance. I was the daughter who stayed close when others moved away. The sister who never said no. The mother who gave even when there was nothing left to give. My life revolved around making things easier for everyone else. I never asked for much in return, just presence, affection, maybe a little bit of gratitude. But on that morning, I realized even that was too much to expect. It was a Thursday in late March. The air still crisp but already hinting at spring. My doctor had scheduled a minor outpatient procedure. Nothing life-threatening, but still serious enough to make me nervous. I hadn't been to a hospital in years, and the idea of being sedated, even briefly, scared me. My daughter, Emma, and my sister, Denise, both promised they'd come with me. I didn't even have to ask, they offered eagerly, assuring me that I wouldn't be alone. I believed them, because that's what family does. Or so I thought. That morning, I woke before dawn. I remember the faint hum of the heater and the scent of coffee filling the kitchen as I prepared my bag insurance papers, a water bottle, and a small blanket because hospitals were always cold. I even packed snacks for Emma and Denise, thinking they might get hungry while waiting. That's just who I was thinking of others, even when I was the one under anesthesia. At 7:30, I sent a message to our group chat. Heading out soon. Can't wait to see you both there. I smiled as I typed it, half expecting their replies to pop up instantly. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Silence. By the time I was sitting in the hospital's waiting area, I still hadn't heard from either of them. When my phone finally buzzed, my heart leaped until I read the texts. Emma wrote, "Mom, I can't make it. Emergency meeting, I'll call you after." And Denise's message followed seconds later. "Not feeling well today, Nora. Hope it goes okay. Love you." That's all. 2 sentences each. No offer to reschedule, no concern about how I felt being alone. My hands trembled as I set my phone down, staring at the reception desk while nurses and patients moved around me. I told myself to stay calm, that they probably had valid reasons, but deep down, something inside me cracked quietly like a fracture that doesn't break the bone right away but hurts with every breath afterward. When the nurse called my name, I stood up slowly, clutching the strap of my purse. My legs felt heavy, my throat dry. She smiled kindly and asked if someone would be joining me. I lied and said, "They're on their way." She nodded and led me into the prep room. Lying on that table, staring up at the sterile ceiling tiles, I couldn't stop thinking about the empty chairs in the waiting room. Every beep of the monitor reminded me I was alone. When the anesthesia took effect, the last thing I thought before blacking out was, they didn't even call to say good luck. When I woke up, a nurse was adjusting my IV line. She smiled and said softly, "Everything went well, Nora. You can go home soon. Is someone here to pick you up?" I didn't answer right away. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. There was no one waiting. I fumbled for my phone, checking for missed calls or texts. Nothing. Not even a, "How are you feeling?" I paid for a cab home, leaning my head against the window as the city blurred by. The sun was starting to set, and the light outside was warm and golden, mocking the coldness that had settled in my chest. When I reached home, the house was silent. No sign of Emma. No note, no meal waiting for me. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of my own footsteps. I sat on the edge of my bed, still dizzy from the anesthesia, staring at the wall. I tried to make excuses for them. Maybe Emma really couldn't leave work. Maybe Denise was genuinely sick. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about emergencies or illness. It was about priorities, and I wasn't one. The irony of it all was painful. I had been there for both of them through every crisis, big or small. I held Denise's hand through her divorce, paid Emma's rent when she couldn't manage it, and stayed up countless nights calming their fears. But when I needed them just once, they vanished. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something fundamental had shifted. My love for them was still there, but the trust that once anchored it had dissolved. I didn't cry much. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that day like a film I couldn't turn off. Then, somewhere between exhaustion and heartbreak, a thought formed quietly but firmly in my mind. I couldn't keep giving my everything to people who only showed up when it suited them. When I got home later that day and found no one waiting for me, I made a silent promise that would change everything. For years, I had been the backbone of everyone's comfort, and I didn't even notice it. It's strange how easily people grow used to being taken care of. It starts small, covering a late bill, cooking extra portions for someone just in case, helping out temporarily. Then one day, you realize those temporary favors became the structure of everyone else's lives. That was my reality. I had built a quiet system of generosity, and they had built their comfort on it. Emma, my daughter, was 24 and still figuring things out. She lived with me rent-free, spending her days scrolling through job listings and nights going out with friends. I didn't mind at first. I wanted her to feel supported. I told myself she was still young, still adjusting to adulthood. But months became years, and every time I suggested a timeline for her to move out, she'd brush it off with a laugh and say, "Mom, I'll leave when I can actually afford it." Somehow that day never came. Denise, my younger sister, was no different. At 39, she had mastered the art of being helpless. She worked part-time but lived beyond her means. Every few weeks, she'd show up at my door with a new crisis, a late payment, a car issue, a temporary loan. It was always phrased gently. "Just until next week, Nora. I promise." And every single time I caved. I wanted to believe her promises, even though I knew better. There was also my nephew, Tyler. He was a good kid, ambitious, polite, but Denise couldn't afford his college tuition. I quietly paid for it, never telling him or her how much I had to dip into my savings. I told myself I was investing in his future. Maybe, I thought, if I helped him, he'd remember me when I was old and alone. That thought used to comfort me. Now, it just made me sad. My late husband, Richard, had been the provider once. When he passed, his insurance money kept us afloat. I was careful with it, investing some, saving most. It wasn't an endless fortune, but it was enough for a modest, peaceful life. Somehow, that peace became everyone else's safety net. Looking back, I see how I confused love with usefulness. Every family gathering, every holiday, I was the planner, the cook, the cleaner, the buyer of gifts. When someone's car broke down, they called me. When they needed advice, they called me. But when I needed help, silence. My worth to them was measured in what I could do, not who I was. After the clinic incident, something in me snapped, but not in a dramatic way. It was quieter, almost clinical. I began watching them like an outsider. I wanted to know if that day had been a one-time lapse or a reflection of who they truly were. So, I started paying attention. Every conversation, every reaction, every casual comment, I noticed it all. One afternoon, Emma came home complaining about how exhausting her day was. I asked what she did, and she sighed. "Mom, you wouldn't understand. It's hard applying for jobs online." I wanted to laugh, but I just nodded. Denise called that evening, asking if I could spot her $300 because her paycheck was delayed. I told her I'd think about it. Her tone changed instantly, sweetness replaced by irritation. "You've always been the responsible one, Nora," she said sharply. "Don't start acting different now." The words stayed with me all night. Acting different. As if my only role was to say yes. A few days later, I decided to test them not out of spite, but curiosity. I told Emma that my debit card had been frozen, and that I couldn't access my savings for a few days. I wanted to see her reaction. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Just use your credit card, Mom. You always figure it out." Denise's response was almost identical. "You'll manage like you always do." Neither offered to help. Not even a Do you need anything? That's when I realized I wasn't part of their lives. I was their safety plan, their invisible insurance policy. My love had become so reliable it no longer registered as love. It was expected, like running water or electricity. Always there, always working, until it isn't. I began writing everything down in a notebook, each interaction, each subtle disappointment. It wasn't out of bitterness, but clarity. I needed to see the truth in ink, stripped of excuses and emotion. The more I wrote, the clearer it became. I had spent years building comfort for people who wouldn't cross the street to check on me. I stopped initiating calls. I waited to see who would reach out. Days passed. Then a week. Not a single message from either of them. It was like I'd vanished, and no one noticed. For the first time, I truly understood what loneliness felt like, not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from being surrounded by people who only take. One evening, as I sat at the dining table with my untouched dinner, I caught sight of the family photos hanging on the wall. Smiling faces, happy memories. But as I stared longer, the images felt hollow, like props in a play I no longer believed in. The people in those photos weren't the same ones who had left me sitting in a hospital waiting room, clutching my coat in fear. Those versions of them had disappeared a long time ago. And in that moment, I realized something painful but freeing. Love without reciprocity isn't love. It's servitude, disguised as devotion. I had been serving everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own dignity. What I began to notice in the weeks after broke the last pieces of denial I had left. I started realizing how invisible I had become in my own family. It's a strange thing to wake up one day and see that the people you've loved most don't actually see you at all. I don't mean physically, of course. They saw me cooking dinner, folding laundry, or sitting in my chair watching TV, but not once did they look at me and ask, "Are you okay?" I had become the background noise in their lives, the hum of convenience that only mattered when it stopped working. The morning after my so-called recovery, I made breakfast like always. Eggs, toast, and coffee for Emma. I waited to see if she'd mention the surgery, ask how I was feeling, or maybe just say she was sorry for not coming. She didn't. She grabbed her plate, sat at the table scrolling through her phone, and mumbled, "Thanks, Mom." That was it. No eye contact. I stared at her for a long moment, wondering if she could feel the disappointment radiating off me. She couldn't. She never did. Denise was no better. She came by later that week, chattering about her coworker's drama and a new nail salon she'd discovered. I listened quietly, waiting for her to remember my clinic visit. When she finally paused to sip her coffee, I thought she might ask. Instead, she said, "Oh, by the way, can you transfer me $200? My check didn't clear, and rent's due." That was all. Not a word about how I felt, or if I was recovering well. I sent her the money, but inside, something broke a little more. Days turned into weeks, and their behavior didn't change. Emma left her laundry piled up, used my car without asking, and spent most nights out with friends. Denise kept coming by, borrowing groceries and money as if it were her right. They didn't even say thank you anymore. My kindness had turned into their expectation. I decided to test a theory one afternoon. I told them both I was having financial trouble, that I might need to downsize or rent out a room to cover expenses. Emma frowned and said, "Wait, if you rent a room, where will I sleep?" Denise looked worried for a moment, then asked, "So you won't be able to lend me money anymore?" Not one of them asked if I was okay. It was always about what they might lose. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen. I started writing down every instance of neglect, every little moment where their indifference showed. March 8, no one called to check after my appointment. March 14, Emma used my credit card without asking. March 21, Denise borrowed money again, no thank you. Each line felt like a tiny wound being reopened, but I needed to see it clearly. For years, I'd told myself they loved me, they were just busy or stressed, but the truth was in the ink. I had built a life that revolved around people who never looked back at me. Meals appeared on the table like magic. Bills got paid, laundry folded, lights stayed on. To them, it was just the natural order of things. Mom handles it, Nora fixes it, everything's fine. I was their system, not their person. I had spent years trying to make them proud or comfortable, but they were too self-involved to notice. I tried a small experiment next. I stopped cooking dinner for a few days. I wanted to see how long it would take before they noticed. Emma came home on the second night, opened the fridge, and said, "What's for dinner?" When I told her I hadn't made anything, she sighed dramatically and said, "Mom, you know I don't have time to cook." Denise dropped by that same evening, saw the empty counter, and joked, "What happened to your famous lasagna nights?" I smiled faintly and said, "Guess I'm taking a break." They both laughed it off, not realizing I wasn't joking. As I watched them carry on, the truth became clearer. My love had made me invisible. They didn't mean to be cruel, they were simply comfortable. Too comfortable. I had spent decades shielding them from responsibility, and in return, they had forgotten I was human. They saw me as an endless resource, not a person with limits, fears, or needs. That realization stung. But it also woke something in me, a quiet strength that had been dormant for years. I stopped answering Denise's calls right away. I started saying no to Emma's casual requests. At first, it confused them. Then it annoyed them. But for me, it was liberating. Saying no felt like breathing for the first time after years underwater. Still, the hardest part wasn't their reactions, it was watching myself detach from the people I'd built my life around. I'd spent so long believing that being needed meant being loved. But it wasn't love. It was dependency. And I was finally ready to stop feeding it. One night, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, looking at the old family photo on the mantel. Richard's face smiled back at me, calm and kind. He'd warned me once before he passed. "Don't lose yourself trying to keep everyone else afloat." I had brushed it off at the time, thinking he didn't understand how family worked. Now, years later, his words echoed in my mind like a warning I should have heeded. But then Emma said something one night that pushed me past my breaking point. It was a Wednesday night, and Emma came into the kitchen complaining about Wi-Fi and dinner. I was sitting at the table, paying bills, when she burst through the door, slamming her bag down like she owned the place. The noise startled me, and my pen slipped, marking a black streak across the electric bill. She didn't even notice. "Mom," she groaned. "The Wi-Fi's acting up again. Can you call the company or something? I've been disconnected 3 times already." I looked up at her, tired but calm. "Emma," I said quietly, "you didn't even ask how I was doing. It's been 2 weeks since my surgery, and you haven't mentioned it once." She froze for a second, then sighed. "Oh my God, Mom, we've already talked about this. It was a minor procedure. You're fine, you're just being dramatic." That word dramatic hit me like a slap. I stared at her, wondering if she could see how much that single word hurt. I wasn't being dramatic. I had been scared, alone, and abandoned by the people I trusted most. But she said it with such casual cruelty, as if my feelings were nothing more than an inconvenience. "I was alone, Emma," I said softly. "No one came. I was terrified." She rolled her eyes, arms crossed. "Mom, I had a meeting that day. I told you. What did you want me to do? Skip it. You're an adult. You can handle yourself." I felt something inside me turn cold. That was the moment I realized my daughter didn't see me as her mother anymore, just as someone who existed to make her life easier. Before I could respond, the phone rang. It was Denise. I picked up, my voice still trembling. "Nora," she said cheerfully. "How are you? Oh wait, before I forget. Can you lend me $500? It's just until Friday, I swear." I blinked in disbelief. No greeting, no "how are you feeling?" Just straight to business. I told her I couldn't, right now, that things were tight. There was a long pause, then her tone turned sharp. You've always been the responsible one, Nora. Don't start changing on me now. Changing. That word lingered in my mind. I wasn't changing. I was waking up. After I hung up, I sat there in silence, surrounded by the hum of the refrigerator and Emma's footsteps above me. My body was still healing, but my heart was the one truly aching. I realized I was invisible to both of them, not because they couldn't see me, but because they didn't want to. Later that night, I went into my room, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank screen. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. I typed 3 words into a new document: revised last will. My hands shook slightly, but there was a calm determination beneath it. I had spent my whole life making sure others were taken care of. Now, it was time to take care of myself. I remembered Richard's voice again, steady and gentle. Don't let people use your kindness as a leash. For years, I ignored that advice. I thought I was being strong by giving endlessly. But now, as I stared at those words on the screen, I understood exactly what he meant. My kindness had turned into my captivity. I stayed up until midnight, researching how to change a will. It wasn't complicated, but it required thought, precision, and witnesses. I already knew who would help me, Mr. Hall, the lawyer who had handled Richard's estate. He had been kind to me, honest, and trustworthy. I drafted an email to him that night. Mr. Hall, I'd like to make some changes to my estate documents. Could we schedule a meeting? The moment I hit send, I felt an odd sense of peace wash over me. Not joy, not excitement, just peace. Like I had taken back something that had been stolen from me for years. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual, but this time, there was a quiet confidence in every motion. Emma came down, yawning, and asked if I could pay her car insurance bill that was accidentally overdue. I looked at her for a moment, then simply said, "No." She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly that," I said, sipping my coffee. "You're an adult. You can handle it." She didn't respond. She just stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe, in that moment, she was. The days that followed were tense. Emma became distant, giving me the cold shoulder. Denise texted less frequently once I stopped sending money. And me? I felt lighter. It was as though the invisible weight of their dependence had finally begun to lift. Still, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. I missed the version of my family I thought I had, the one I imagined would hold my hand at the clinic, who would have made soup for me when I came home weak and tired. But that family didn't exist anymore. Maybe it never had. That night, I printed out a blank notepad and began jotting down ideas for what I wanted to do with my estate. I listed charities, causes, and names of people who had shown me genuine kindness over the years. There was the young woman at the pharmacy who always asked how I was doing, the neighbor who shoveled my driveway without being asked, the community center that had supported me when Richard passed. As I wrote, I realized that generosity wasn't the problem, it was who I had chosen to give it to. Love shouldn't drain you. By the time I closed my laptop, the bitterness had settled into quiet resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done being taken for granted. That was the first night I opened my laptop and typed the words, "Revised last will and testament." What started as a moment of pain became the beginning of my revenge. I wasn't going to confront them, I was going to outsmart them. The day after I drafted that email to Mr. Hall, I woke up feeling a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't bitterness that drove me, it was realization. I had spent decades waiting for apologies that would never come, for affection that was always conditional. So instead of shouting, crying, or pleading for change, I decided to do something quieter, smarter, and far more permanent. Mr. Hall replied to my message that same morning. His tone was professional yet kind, just as I remembered. "Of course, Nora. Let's schedule a meeting. Come by Thursday at 11. We'll discuss the changes." Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the next 2 days gathering all my documents, property deeds, insurance policies, bank statements, organizing them neatly into a folder. Each paper I placed inside felt like a step closer to freedom. Emma noticed the stack on my desk one evening and asked casually, "What's all that, Mom?" I smiled faintly and said, "Just some paperwork I need to sort out." She shrugged and walked away, unaware that those papers would one day erase her entitlement. When Thursday arrived, I dressed carefully: navy slacks, a soft beige blouse, and the gold bracelet Richard had given me on our 10th anniversary. Not out of vanity, but to remind myself that I was someone who once had purpose, confidence, and control. The drive to Mr. Hall's office was quiet. The city felt different that morning, clearer somehow, as though it was reflecting my decision back at me. Mr. Hall greeted me with his usual warm smile. "Nora," he said, shaking my hand. "It's good to see you. How have you been?" I hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I've been better, but I've also been wiser." He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. I told him everything from the day at the clinic to the years of being taken for granted. He listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before he spoke. "You're not the first person I've heard this from," he said softly. "Family can wound us deeper than anyone else. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I met his eyes and said, "Yes. I've made up my mind. I'm not punishing them, Mr. Hall. I'm just redistributing my love to people who actually need it." And that's exactly what we did. We created a new will. One that erased Emma and Denise completely. Instead, I directed my estate to meaningful causes. Half of it would go to a scholarship fund in Richard's name for single mothers pursuing education. Another portion would go to a women's shelter I had quietly supported for years. The rest, I decided, would go to my friend Grace, someone who had stood by me when no one else did. Mr. Hall drafted the new documents carefully, his pen gliding smoothly across the paper. When he finished, he handed me the draft for review. "Take your time reading this over," he said, "and let me know if there's anything you'd like to adjust." I read every line twice. It felt surreal. Almost like I was reading someone else's story, a woman finally reclaiming her power after a lifetime of being overlooked. When I signed my name at the bottom, I felt an indescribable release. The invisible chains that had bound me to obligation fell away in that single motion. As I left the office, the air felt lighter, the sun warmer. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for thinking of myself. I stopped by a cafe on the way home, ordered a cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching people pass by. Every sip tasted like freedom. Back at home, Emma was sprawled on the couch watching TV. She didn't even glance up when I walked in. "Did you pay the water bill, Mom?" she asked absently. I looked at her and smiled to myself. "Yes," I said quietly. "I took care of everything today." She nodded, satisfied, completely unaware of what those words truly meant. That evening, I sat by the fireplace with my journal and wrote down everything that had happened. I described how calm I felt, how peaceful the decision had made me. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense, it was about justice, about balance. For years I had given love without boundaries. Now I was drawing the line with ink and legality. I knew it would shock them one day. Maybe even hurt them. But that wasn't my intention anymore. I simply wanted them to understand, even if it took years, that neglect has consequences. That you cannot take and expect the source to never run dry. Later that night, as I tucked the signed documents into a folder and placed them in my safe, I felt Richard's presence in the room. Almost like a whisper saying, "You've done the right thing, Nora." I smiled faintly, touching my bracelet. He had always believed in fairness, in standing up for oneself. I wished he could have seen me that day not as the woman who served everyone else's happiness, but as the woman who finally stood up for her own. But before I could finalize it, Emma stumbled upon something that nearly exposed my plan. It happened on a Sunday morning when Emma was helping me clean the study. I should have known something was off from the start. She never volunteered to clean anything, especially not my study, the one room in the house she usually avoided because it smelled like old paper. But that morning, she appeared at my door, all smiles, holding a rag and saying, "Let's get this place organized, Mom. You've got too much clutter in here." I hesitated, sensing that sudden enthusiasm had a purpose. Still, I agreed, telling myself there was nothing to hide. I had tucked the new draft of my will inside a folder labeled Personal Documents, buried under some old tax records. It wasn't signed yet, Mr. Hall and I were set to finalize it in a few days, but the last thing I needed was Emma seeing her name missing from it. We worked in silence for a while. I dusted the bookshelves while she sorted papers from a drawer, humming to herself. Then, out of nowhere, I heard her say, "What's this?" My heart skipped. I turned around to see her holding the blue folder, the one with the draft will inside. "Mom," she said, eyes narrowing. "Why does this say last will and testament?" I walked over calmly, though my pulse was racing. "That's just some old paperwork, honey. From years ago." She flipped it open before I could stop her. Her eyes scanned the pages, and I could see the confusion turn into anger. "Wait," she said sharply. "Why isn't my name on here? Where's Denise? Who's Grace? Who's this foundation?" I took the folder from her hands and closed it gently. "Emma, that's none of your concern right now. I told you it's an old draft. Mr. Hall and I were just updating some things." She stared at me for a long moment, then scoffed. "Updating? So, what, you're planning to give everything away to strangers?" I met her glare with calmness I didn't feel. "Strangers? No, Emma. To people and causes that have actually cared about me." Her expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous, Mom. You don't even know those people. And what about me? What about family?" I almost laughed at the irony. Family. The same family that left me at the clinic alone. But I didn't say that, not yet. Instead, I said quietly, "You wouldn't understand, Emma. Not right now." She stormed out of the study, slamming the door behind her. I exhaled slowly, my hands trembling. That folder had almost ruined everything. I placed it in a new spot inside a locked drawer this time. I told myself she'd calm down eventually. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard whispers downstairs. I crept halfway down the stairs and saw Emma in the kitchen, on the phone. Her voice was low but sharp. "Yeah, Aunt Denise, I saw it with my own eyes. She's leaving everything to some charity and a random woman named Grace. We need to do something before she finalizes it." My stomach turned. That was her plan to rally Denise and confront me together. I felt equal parts hurt and vindicated. They hadn't even waited a full day before plotting how to protect their inheritance. Not me, their mother and sister, but their inheritance. The next morning, I pretended nothing was wrong. I made breakfast as usual, set the table, and asked Emma how she'd slept. She barely looked at me. "Fine," she muttered. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from Denise, no doubt. I caught glimpses of her screen when she wasn't paying attention. Words like lawyer, rights, and plan flashed across. That evening, I decided to get ahead of them. I called Mr. Hall and explained what had happened. His voice stayed steady. "Don't worry, Nora. They can't contest something that isn't finalized yet. And once it's official, it will be legally airtight. Just make sure they don't find any copies." I assured him I'd take care of it. Then I went to the study, retrieved the document, and hid it somewhere even Emma would never think to look inside an old sewing box at the back of my closet. It was a strange comfort, knowing the very thing they feared most was safe under my roof. Over the next few days, Emma and Denise both began treating me differently. It wasn't affection, it was surveillance. They suddenly became attentive, overly polite, watching every move I made. Emma would linger around when I was on the phone, pretending to tidy up. Denise stopped by unannounced just to visit, though her eyes darted constantly to my desk and drawers. Their sudden sweetness almost made me laugh. I played along, acting oblivious, thanking them for their concern. Inside, I was burning with both sadness and satisfaction. They were finally giving me attention, but only because they feared losing something. Not me. Something. That week, Emma cooked dinner for the first time in years. She set the table, poured me a glass of wine, and said, "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe we've both been stressed lately. We should talk." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Oh, the future, family, how we handle things when, well, someday." She hesitated on the word someday, like she couldn't say when you die. I smiled faintly. I already have plans for that, sweetheart. Her smile faltered. Right, about that. Maybe you should reconsider. I mean, I'm your daughter. Aunt Denise and I, we're your family. Wouldn't it make more sense to keep things in the family? Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but the fear underneath was unmistakable. I took a slow sip of wine and said, Emma, love isn't about paperwork. And neither is family. She stared at me, speechless. I got up, kissed her forehead, and said goodnight, leaving her at the table with her untouched dinner. When I reached my room, I finally let myself smile, not a cruel one, but a quiet, resolute one. They had shown me their true priorities, and that knowledge was worth more than anything I owned. That's when I decided to take the plan even further to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. Changing the will wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. I had always imagined revenge as something loud and dramatic, a confrontation, a scene that would make everyone gasp. But the truth is, the most devastating revenge is quiet and sensible. You remove the things someone depends on and watch how quickly their world unravels. I decided to start with money, because money was the language my family spoke best. I began small and deliberate. The first month after the will draft, I stopped covering Emma's small, everyday expenses. When she asked if I could pay for a new phone charger, I said no. When she complained that the electric bill was higher this month, I said she could take on half and taught her how to set up an autopay. She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I didn't lecture her. I simply offered practical steps and closed my wallet. It was amazing how quickly entitlement met friction. Denise was easier in some ways, more predictable. She called asking for $400 to fix her car. I said I couldn't help and suggested she take it to a mechanic who offered payment plans. Her voice turned sharp. You've always pulled through before, Nora. Don't start now, I replied evenly. I'm sorry you're in a bind. I can help you find options, but I can't lend money. The silence that followed felt like a verdict being read. For the first time, she had to find a solution without me. I started redirecting the time I used to spend rescuing them into things that mattered to me. I scheduled appointments I'd been postponing, signed up for a pottery class, and volunteered at the women's shelter where I donated part of what I used to give them. Each plate I cleaned for someone else's meal felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Every dollar I redirected to the scholarship in Richard's name felt like a promise I was finally keeping, not to them, but to a future I believed in. Their reactions were immediate and instructive. Emma began to avoid home earlier in the evenings, claiming new projects and friends. When she did come back, the tone was colder, more transactional. She would ask about bills and expenses as if she were auditing an accounts payable ledger. Denise called less often, and, when she did, her voice carried that brittle mix of entitlement and accusation. You're being selfish, she accused one evening, her words coming out sharp and practiced. I answered calmly, I'm prioritizing differently. I won't finance your life anymore. I watched them flail and fume, and I felt none of the cruelty I'd imagined I might. Instead, I felt pity and relief. Pity because they'd built their lives on the assumption I would always hold the scaffolding. Relief because now the scaffolding was mine to dismantle. I learned to enjoy the small liberties, the way I could plan my day without considering how my choices would ripple through their irresponsibility. I didn't change my behavior on a dare. I changed it with a plan. I sat with Mr. Hall and reviewed contingencies. He suggested tightening online access, setting alerts, and making sure all beneficiary paperwork was current. He reassured me the legal foundation was strong, but he advised discretion. Let them stew and let reality teach them, he said. I followed his counsel. I kept my savings in separate accounts and had all major transactions routed through a trustee-friendly setup so nothing could be manipulated. Their sense of entitlement morphed into paranoia. Emma began checking my reactions to every call, reading my expressions like they contained secret codes. Denise tried to guilt me, invoking memories, childhood favors, even Richard's name. I listened, acknowledged the past, and redirected the conversation to the present, boundaries. I loved you enough to give. I told them both when I had to, but I won't love myself less to feed your habit. The neighborhood watched too, though nobody said much at first. Neighbors who used to drop in with casseroles now offered small, sympathetic smiles as they passed by. The women from the shelter waved when they saw me. Grace, who'd become my closest friend, brought over dinner one Tuesday and stayed until late, discussing future plans and book ideas. I found it oddly healing to be surrounded by people who didn't see me as a bank, but as a person. And yet, the universe has a sense of irony. Just as I felt steadier, Emma did something I hadn't expected. She struck back in a way that felt petty but sharp. She started to spread the rumor around town that I was unstable, that my memory was failing, that maybe I shouldn't be making major decisions alone. At first, it seemed like the flailing of someone cornered. Then I overheard a barista at the coffee shop mention it to another patron, and I realized gossip can be weaponized as well. I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I documented everything: calls, conversations, odd behavior with the clinical calm I'd used when writing my will. I updated my attorney, who told me to keep copies of everything and to refrain from engaging in public rebuttals that would only fuel the rumor mill. I agreed and did the opposite of dramatic. I lived my life quietly, continued my donations, and kept my heart open to friendships that healed me. Emma's retaliation seemed small at first: rumors and accusations, but then she escalated in a way that threatened everything I'd quietly built. Emma started going through my mail, checking my drawers, and questioning every phone call I made. It began subtly: little things I could have brushed off as paranoia. A letter moved from one pile to another, my desk drawer slightly ajar when I knew I'd closed it. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. But one afternoon, when I came home early from volunteering, I caught her red-handed. She was sitting at my desk, flipping through my bank statements with a notebook beside her, scribbling down numbers. "Emma," I said quietly, trying to steady my voice, "what exactly are you doing?" She froze, color draining from her face. Then she stammered, "I was just making sure you're not being scammed, Mom. You know, people target older women online." "Older women?" I repeated, my tone calm but sharp. "You mean me?" She tried to laugh it off, but her nervous smile only made the betrayal sting more. I took the papers from her hands, stacked them neatly, and said, "Emma, if you were truly worried about me, you would have asked. You wouldn't have gone behind my back." She looked defiant for a moment, then softened her expression. "Mom, I just care about you. You've been acting weird lately, locking your drawers, hiding papers. I don't want someone taking advantage of you." I met her gaze steadily. "No one is taking advantage of me anymore," I said. "Not this time." She didn't respond. She just stood there, her jaw tightening as she realized what I meant. She stormed out of the study, slamming the door so hard that the picture frame above my desk rattled. I sat there for a long moment, my heart pounding. That was the first time my own daughter had looked at me not with love, but with suspicion and fear. The following days confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't protecting me, she was protecting her potential inheritance. Every conversation became a fishing expedition. "Who were you talking to on the phone, Mom?" she'd ask casually, pretending to wipe the counter. Or, "What's in that envelope from Mr. Hall's office?" I started to answer her with vague, polite phrases. "Oh, just routine things," I'd say. Inside, I was documenting everything. I wrote down dates, times, her exact words. I even took pictures of the drawers she'd opened, the mail she'd rifled through. If she wanted to play games, I'd play them smarter. One evening, I caught her trying to guess my online banking password. She didn't see me standing in the doorway as she typed and erased repeatedly, muttering under her breath. When I finally stepped into the room, she jumped. "I was just trying to help set up autopay for you," she said quickly. "On my personal account?" I asked. "Yeah, I mean, you always forget your passwords." "I don't forget, Emma. I just don't share." That night, I changed every password I had. I called my bank, set up two-factor authentication, and added a note for my lawyer to contact me immediately if anyone, especially family, tried to access my information. Mr. Hall didn't sound surprised when I told him. Families can be complicated, he said gently. You're doing the right thing, Nora. Keep everything documented. His calm professionalism grounded me. For the first time in months, I realized how much stronger I had become. The woman who once waited nervously in hospital lobbies, hoping someone would show up, was gone. The woman standing in her place had learned to protect herself even from those she loved. But that didn't make it hurt less. Every time Emma looked at me with those calculating eyes, I felt a pang of loss. I missed the little girl who used to climb into my lap after a bad dream, who used to hold my hand at the grocery store. Now, all I saw was a grown woman who viewed me as an obstacle. Denise wasn't far behind. She started calling more frequently, asking prying questions. So, how's Emma? I heard she's worried about you. You're not doing anything rash, are you, Nora? The forced concern in her tone was almost laughable. I knew Emma had told her about the will. They were working together now, both pretending to care while scheming behind closed doors. I stopped confiding in them completely. Instead, I leaned more on Grace and the women at the shelter. Grace could see right through me one afternoon when I came in looking tired. You've been holding too much in, she said softly, handing me a cup of tea. Family wounds cut the deepest because we don't expect them to hold the knife. Her words hit me squarely in the chest. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had gone wrong. I didn't raise Emma to be greedy. I didn't teach Denise to manipulate. Maybe my biggest mistake wasn't giving too little, it was giving too much. They had never learned limits because I had erased them. So, I began to detach emotionally. I answered Emma's questions with politeness, not warmth. I limited Denise's calls to short updates. The more I withdrew, the more desperate they became. Emma started snooping through my mail again, even checking my purse when she thought I wasn't looking. One evening, I found one of my checkbooks missing. I confronted her calmly, asking if she'd seen it. She lied, eyes darting away, muttering that she hadn't. I didn't push. I simply called the bank and froze the account. If she wanted to test me, I was ready. I wasn't the naive mother anymore. I was the woman they underestimated, the one who could play the long game without losing her composure. I realized then she wasn't afraid of losing me, just losing access to my money, but I also knew karma would take its course sooner than she expected. It didn't take long for life to humble both of them. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, even when you think it's forgotten you. I didn't wish for anything bad to happen to Emma or Denise, but when karma finally arrived, I can't say I was surprised. It came quietly, steadily, in the same way they had once eroded my trust, one careless act at a time. It started with Emma. She'd been working part-time at a small marketing agency, one of those jobs that sounded glamorous on paper but paid little. She was always late, always distracted, always cutting corners. One afternoon, she came home pale and shaking. "They fired me," she said flatly, throwing her bag onto the couch. I didn't respond immediately. She waited, expecting the usual Nora response, the comforting words, the sympathy, maybe even the offer to cover her rent while she looked for another job. But I didn't say anything. I simply asked, "Why?" "They said I wasn't focused enough," she muttered, avoiding my eyes. "Can you believe that? After everything I've done for them?" I nodded slowly, sipping my tea. Sometimes focus is the one thing we take for granted until it's gone. Her eyes narrowed. "Are you trying to make a point, Mom?" "No," I said, setting my cup down. "Just an observation." She didn't appreciate that. For days after, she stomped around the house, slamming doors, muttering about unfair bosses and stupid corporate people. I stayed calm, letting the silence teach what my words couldn't. A week later, Denise's downfall arrived too. Her husband, Alan, who had been the family's self-proclaimed financial expert, finally walked out. Apparently, he'd been hiding debts for months, gambling behind her back. When the truth came out, so did the bills, credit cards, loans. even unpaid taxes. She called me that night, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Nora," she gasped between tears. "He's gone. He took the car, the savings, everything. I don't know what to do." My instinct, my old automatic instinct, was to comfort her. To tell her it would be okay, that I'd help her get back on her feet. But then I remembered all the nights I'd been left alone, the countless times she'd taken without asking, the days she didn't show up when I needed her most. So I took a breath and said gently, "Denise, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Have you considered talking to a financial counselor?" There was a pause. Then she snapped, "A counselor? Nora, I'm drowning here. I need money, not therapy." "I understand," I said evenly. "But I can't give you any. I've made changes, Denise. You'll have to figure things out just like I had to." The silence that followed was colder than any winter wind. She hung up without another word. For the next few weeks, I watched them unravel. Emma tried to act like she still had everything under control, but I could see the cracks forming. She stopped going out with friends, started eating dinner in her room, and avoided me entirely. Denise, on the other hand, called every few days, sometimes angry, sometimes pitiful, always desperate. Each time, I offered advice but never money. One afternoon, I came home from volunteering at the shelter to find both of them waiting in my living room. Emma sat stiffly on the couch, her eyes red from crying. Denise was pacing, her face pale and drawn. "Mom," Emma began quietly, "we need to talk." I sat down across from them, folding my hands calmly in my lap. "Go ahead," Denise spoke first. "We're not here to fight, we just need some help. Things have been hard. You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." Emma nodded quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, Mom. I know I haven't been the best daughter lately, but I'm really trying. I just need a little help to get back on my feet." For a long moment, I said nothing. I looked at their faces, so familiar, yet suddenly foreign. They looked smaller now. Fragile. Worn down by the same world they once believed they could manipulate. I wanted to feel triumph, but what I felt instead was clarity. This wasn't about winning, it was about witnessing the consequences of choices. They had spent years believing I would always be their safety net. Now, they were seeing what life looked like without it. "I understand that you're struggling," I said finally. "And I want you both to know I don't hate you. But I can't go back to being your rescuer. That role nearly destroyed me." Emma sniffled. "So that's it? You're just going to let us suffer?" "No," I said softly. "I'm letting you grow." Denise scoffed. "That's easy for you to say when you're comfortable." "Comfort," I said quietly, "comes from peace, not money. You've both had every chance to find it." They didn't respond. The silence stretched, heavy and awkward, until Denise finally muttered, "You've changed, Nora." "I had to," I said simply. "You left me no choice." They left soon after, both of them too proud to cry in front of me. I sat alone in the living room, the fading daylight casting long shadows across the walls. It should have felt lonely, but it didn't. It felt peaceful, like the quiet after a storm finally passes. Later that night, as I sipped tea by the window, I thought about how strange life could be. The same people who once ignored your pain eventually come to feel their own, and somehow, that's when empathy finds its way back into the world. I didn't need to yell or seek revenge, it was already unfolding. But I still had one final act left before I could truly move on. When the day came to sign my final will, I felt peace like never before. The air outside was crisp, with that early autumn chill that hinted at change. The leaves had just started turning gold, and for the first time in years, I noticed how beautiful they looked. I wasn't rushing, wasn't anxious, wasn't burdened by anyone else's chaos. It was just me, my purpose, and a folder full of carefully chosen words that would outlive me. I drove to Mr. Hall's office that morning with a calm determination. The same streets I'd driven countless times before suddenly felt different, wider, lighter. as if even the city itself knew this was an ending and a beginning at once. When I arrived, Mr. Hall greeted me with that warm professionalism I had come to appreciate so much. He shook my hand and said, "You look different today, Nora. Lighter." I said with a small smile. "I'm ready." We walked into his office, sunlight streaming through the blinds, falling across the polished wooden table where my new will waited printed neatly, sealed in an envelope with my name embossed across the front. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the weight of my decision one last time. "Everything is in order, Mr. Hall said, sliding a few pages toward me. "We'll go through each one carefully before you sign." We reviewed it line by line. My estate would be divided exactly as I'd planned, half to the scholarship fund in Richard's memory, a generous donation to the women's shelter that had become a second home to me, and the remainder to Grace, who had shown me more genuine compassion in 1 year than my own family had in decades. Not a cent to Emma or Denise. Not out of cruelty, but out of fairness. As I initialed each page, I felt something deep inside me untangle. Years of resentment, disappointment, and heartache began to lift. By the time I reached the final signature line, my hand was steady. I pressed the pen to the paper, signed my name with purpose, and set it down. "There," I said quietly. "It's done." Mr. Hall smiled approvingly. "How do you feel?" I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "Free." He nodded, sliding the documents into a folder. "I'll keep the original in our vault and send you a certified copy. Is there anything else you'd like to include? Sometimes clients leave letters." I had already thought about that. "Yes," I said softly. "2, actually. One for Emma, and one for Denise." He opened a drawer and handed me 2 envelopes. I began to write. Right there in his office. My words flowed easily, not from anger but from clarity. "To Emma, you left me alone when I needed you most, and in doing so, you taught me the value of my own strength. I don't hate you, but I cannot reward neglect with inheritance. My hope for you is that one day you'll understand that love is proven in presence, not in expectation. To Denise, you always believed I would save you, and I did for years. But saving someone who refuses to grow is not love, it's enabling. I wish you wisdom, not wealth. Because wisdom, unlike money, can't be wasted." When I finished, I sealed both letters and handed them to Mr. Hall. "Give these to them when the time comes." He nodded solemnly. "Of course, Nora." We stood, shook hands again, and I thanked him for his discretion, his kindness, and his quiet understanding. As I walked out of his office, the sun was already higher, bathing everything in a soft golden light. I stopped for a moment at the top of the steps, closed my eyes, and let the warmth touch my face. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on my own, unshaken, self-assured, and whole. On the drive home, I played Richard's favorite song on the radio, something I hadn't done since his funeral. The melody filled the car, bittersweet but comforting. It felt like he was there beside me, proud of what I'd done. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Emma sitting on the porch steps, her phone in hand. My stomach tightened slightly, intuition telling me this wasn't a coincidence. She stood as I got out of the car, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Mom," she said, trying to sound casual. "Where've you been? I've been calling." "I had an appointment," I replied evenly, walking past her toward the front door. "With who?" she pressed. "My lawyer," I said simply. Her expression flickered worry, frustration, maybe even fear. "Mom, we need to talk. I know things have been tense, but I think we can fix this." I paused, keys in hand. "Fix what, exactly?" She hesitated. "Us, the family. I've been thinking I can do better. I know I've been distant, and I don't want you to think I don't care." I turned to face her fully. "Emma, caring isn't about words, it's about showing up, and for a long time, you didn't." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I almost faltered. I wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay. But then I remembered the silence of that hospital waiting room. the cold chair under me, the loneliness of realizing no one was coming. I couldn't unlive that moment, and I couldn't keep pretending that love was enough to erase it. She stepped closer. Please, Mom, I don't want us to end up like this. I softened my tone but not my resolve. Emma, I love you. That will never change. But love and trust, they're not the same thing. You have to rebuild one to earn the other. She nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. I'll try, she whispered. I hope you do, I said. She left soon after, saying she needed some air. I watched her drive away, the sound of her car fading down the street. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. The will was signed. The letters were written. The last ties that bound me in guilt were severed. That night, I sat by the fireplace, sipping tea and staring into the flames. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence with warmth instead of emptiness. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had reclaimed. Then, a phone call from Emma the next day tested that newfound peace. Emma called, crying uncontrollably, saying she knew I was angry and wanted to fix things. It was early morning, and I was still in my robe, sipping coffee by the window when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. After everything, silence had become a kind of peace for me. But something in my chest told me to pick up. The moment I did, I heard her voice broken, trembling, desperate. Mom, please don't hang up, she sobbed. I know I've messed up. I know I hurt you. Her crying startled me. I hadn't heard her sound that raw in years. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. I can't stop thinking about what I did. You're right, I wasn't there for you. I was selfish, ungrateful, and I took you for granted. But I want to change. Please, Mom. I just want a chance to make things right. For a moment, I said nothing. I stared out the window, watching the light spill across the garden, dew glittering on the grass. Her words should have made me feel vindicated, but instead, they ached. There she was, my daughter, finally admitting what I'd waited so long to hear. And yet, I didn't trust the timing. Emma, I said softly, why now? She sniffled. Because I can't stand the thought of losing you. You've been cold lately. Distant. And I heard from Aunt Denise that you've been changing everything. I don't care about the money. I swear, I just want us back. That last line lingered in the air. I don't care about the money. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. But I wanted to believe her. I'd spent months building walls of strength, but a mother's heart doesn't forget. Forgiveness, even when undeserved, is stitched into us like instinct. I'm not angry anymore, Emma, I said quietly. Anger takes too much energy, I'm just careful now. She exhaled shakily, relief flooding her tone. Then can we talk? Please? Face to face? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse to protect my fragile peace. But another part, the one that still saw the little girl who used to braid my hair and whisper secrets at bedtime, couldn't say no. All right, I said finally. Dinner tomorrow, just you and me. She agreed instantly, her voice trembling with gratitude. Thank you, Mom. You won't regret it. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I didn't regret agreeing to meet, but I knew better than to expect a miracle. Sometimes people apologize because they're sorry. Other times, they apologize because they're scared of the consequences. Either way, I would hear her out, but on my terms. The next day, I cooked a simple meal: roast chicken, vegetables, and mashed potatoes. It had always been Emma's favorite. As I worked, I found myself humming softly, not from joy, but from a quiet steadiness that had grown inside me. I wasn't the same woman she'd left at the clinic months ago. I wasn't waiting for her approval anymore. When she arrived, she looked exhausted. Her once carefree face was marked by dark circles and worry. You look good, Mom, she said softly, setting her purse down. Thank you, I replied, smiling faintly. You look like you've been through a lot. She nodded, eyes welling again. I have. I've been seeing a therapist. She said I use people to fill the emptiness I never dealt with after Dad died. I think she's right. That caught me off guard. Therapy wasn't something I'd expected from her. I gestured for her to sit, and for the first time in years, we ate dinner without raised voices or awkward silence. She talked, and I listened. Really listened. I kept trying to fill the void with stuff, she said, pushing her food around the plate. Money, friends, distractions. I thought you'd always be there to pick up the slack. But when you stopped, I panicked. I didn't know who I was without your help. I reached across the table and touched her hand gently. Sometimes love looks like letting someone fall, I said. Because if you don't, they'll never learn how to stand. She nodded, tears falling freely. I get that now. I just wish it hadn't taken me losing everything to see it. After dinner, she helped me clean up without being asked. It was such a small gesture, but it meant more than any apology. Before she left, she turned to me at the door. I want to rebuild things, Mom. Slowly. If that's okay. I know it'll take time for you to trust me again. I smiled. It will. But this is a start. After she left, the house felt strangely warm. For the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel naive, it felt possible. But even as I let that hope settle, a part of me stayed cautious. Emma's words were tender. But I knew healing wasn't linear. People fall back into old habits, and wounds reopen when least expected. A few days later, Denise called. Her voice was surprisingly soft. Emma told me you two talked, she said. Maybe it's time we all did. I miss my sister. I hesitated, then agreed. Dinner next week, the three of us. That evening came quickly. The tension at the table was thick at first, but eventually, conversation flowed. We laughed a little, reminisced about our parents, about Richard. For a few fleeting hours, it felt like family again. When they left, both hugged me tightly. Thank you for giving us another chance, Denise said. You're a better person than we deserve. I watched them drive off, the headlights fading down the road. I didn't know if their remorse would last, but in that moment, I chose to believe it might. I hugged them both, but I knew the damage was permanent. And deep down, I realized this wasn't closure, it was just the beginning of their reckoning. Months later, I fell ill again. And this time, Emma took care of me almost too attentively. It started with small symptoms: fatigue, dizziness, sleepless nights. My doctor said it was nothing severe, just a combination of stress and age catching up to me. But I could see the worry in Emma's face when she came over. She began stopping by every day, cooking meals, cleaning the house, even insisting on organizing my medications. It was sweet at first. Then, it started to feel like surveillance. She'd linger near my desk when I opened mail, peek over my shoulder when I logged into my computer, and once, I caught her standing by the safe in my closet, pretending to dust. I wanted to believe she was just being helpful. But old instincts don't lie. This wasn't pure care, it was curiosity. Still, I said nothing. Sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation ever could. I watched her carefully, and the pattern became clear. She wasn't just worried about my health, she was waiting to see if my illness might accelerate the timeline she feared most, the reading of my will. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, reading, when she asked innocently, Mom, have you ever thought about, what happens after? Like, your plans for everything? I looked up from my book, pretending not to catch the meaning beneath her words. After what, dear? She blushed slightly. After you're gone. I smiled calmly. I have everything handled. Her smile faltered, and she nodded slowly. Right. Of course. Over the next few weeks, her visits increased, and her tone grew more careful, measured, even. She'd bring me flowers, ask how I was feeling, and always end with the same question. Is there anything you want me to know? Anything you want to tell me? It almost broke my heart, watching her oscillate between guilt and greed. She wanted to make things right, but not enough to let go of what she thought she deserved. Then, one afternoon, she slipped up, I overheard her on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was hushed but sharp. Mr. Hall hasn't said anything yet. But I know she's up to something. There has to be a way to find out. She was calling my lawyer's office. That night, I called Mr. Hall myself. I assume you've had some interesting calls lately, I said dryly. He sighed softly on the other end. Your daughter's been persistent. I told her, very politely, that I can't disclose any client information. Good, I replied. Let her wonder. He paused. Would you like me to take any additional precautions? Yes, I said. Send her a courtesy letter confirming that all legal documents are secure and confidential. That should make her nervous. He chuckled lightly. As you wish, Nora. And it worked. 2 days later, Emma showed up at my door, waving the sealed letter in her hand. Mom, she said, her voice trembling with forced calm. Why did your lawyer send me this? Because you called him, I said simply. He thought it best to remind you of professional boundaries. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. You don't trust me, she said finally. I met her eyes. I trust you to be exactly who you've shown me you are. That night, she packed a bag and left. She didn't slam the door this time, she just walked out quietly, her silence louder than any outburst. I sat in the living room long after she was gone, watching the clock tick toward midnight. I felt no triumph. Only sadness. The kind that sits deep in your bones, where forgiveness can't quite reach. Weeks passed. My health improved, but my relationship with Emma didn't. She called occasionally, her tone polite but distant. Denise called too, pretending she hadn't heard about the incident with the lawyer. Families fight, she said breezily. It'll blow over. But it didn't blow over. In fact, it ended far more abruptly than I expected. One morning, as I was watering the plants, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Mr. Hall was standing there with a briefcase and an apologetic look. I thought it best to deliver this in person, he said. He handed me a folder. Inside was a letter from his office confirming that copies of my finalized will had been sent to all parties listed. Somehow, through clerical protocol, Emma and Denise had received their copies early. I froze. They already saw it? He nodded gravely. I'm afraid so. That evening, my phone erupted with calls, first Emma, then Denise. When I didn't answer, the messages began pouring in. Angry, hurt, accusatory. Mom, how could you do this? I can't believe you'd betray your own family like this. After everything we've been through, you're giving it all to strangers? I sat on the couch, letting each notification buzz unanswered. I didn't owe them an explanation anymore. They'd already written their verdict the day they abandoned me. Then came the final message. It was from Emma, just one line. You left me alone when I needed you most. I stared at the screen, the irony burning through me like fire. Those exact words, the ones I had written to her in my letter to be delivered after my passing, had come full circle. The next morning, I found a voicemail from Denise. Her voice was cold. Don't bother calling me again, Nora. You've made your choice. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. A silence I had earned. I sat by the window, the sunlight filtering through the curtains, warming my skin. I realized then that peace doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes, it comes from release. From that day on, neither of them called me again, but that silence became my peace. With the noise of their greed gone, I started rebuilding my life around people who truly cared. For the first time in decades, the house felt like it belonged to me again. No arguments echoing down the hall, no passive-aggressive sighs, no unspoken tension lingering in the air. Just peace and the soft hum of a life I was finally living for myself. The mornings became my sanctuary. I'd wake before sunrise, make a cup of coffee, and sit on the porch wrapped in a shawl, listening to the world wake up. The quiet used to scare me. Now, it grounded me. I'd look out at the street and think about how strange it was that solitude could feel so much fuller than the company I used to keep. I started volunteering more hours at the women's shelter. The place had become a second home to me, a refuge not just for those women, but for my own healing. There, I met people who understood pain without needing it explained. Women who had been abandoned by husbands, children, and siblings but still found the strength to rebuild from nothing. Their resilience humbled me. That's where I met Grace. She was 27, soft-spoken, and always carried a notebook in her bag. She had escaped an abusive marriage and was trying to start over. One afternoon, while sorting donated clothes, she told me, "I feel like I'm too broken to start again." I smiled gently. "You're not broken, Grace. You're just unfinished. There's a difference." From that day on, she started sitting with me during lunch breaks, asking about recipes, books, and life. Over time, she became like the daughter I always wished I had, curious, kind, and grateful for the smallest things. One afternoon, after months of volunteering together, Grace found a job at a local bakery. She ran into my arms when she got the news. "I got it, Nora. I finally got it," she exclaimed, tears glistening in her eyes. I hugged her tightly, feeling something inside me mend that I hadn't even realized was broken. "See?" I whispered. "You're stronger than you think." She laughed through tears. "No, you helped me believe that." That moment, simple, genuine, full of light, was more rewarding than anything I'd ever given to Emma or Denise. Not because Grace was perfect, but because she saw me. She valued the love I offered. Over time, Grace became part of my daily life. She'd stop by after work with leftover pastries from the bakery, and we'd sit on the porch talking until the stars came out. Sometimes, she'd bring a few of the other women from the shelter too, and my once empty dining table would be full of laughter, clinking dishes, and stories about second chances. It was in those moments I realized how wrong I had been all those years. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by effort, by kindness, by who shows up when the rest of the world turns away. Mr. Hall, my lawyer, stopped by occasionally to check on me too. He'd bring fresh flowers or pie from his wife's kitchen, and we'd sit in the living room talking about books or the latest community events. He often said, "You look happier now, Nora. There's a light in you that wasn't there before." And he was right. The lines of worry that had once creased my face softened. The house felt alive again. I even started hosting small gatherings, Sunday teas for the shelter volunteers, where we'd sit in the garden and share dreams instead of gossip. For the first time in years, I wasn't just existing, I was living. Every now and then, I thought about Emma and Denise. I wondered what they were doing, where they were. Sometimes I missed them, not who they'd become, but who they once were. I imagined a version of life where they had learned to love without strings, to give without expecting. But then I'd remind myself, you can't rewrite people, only your own story. One afternoon, Grace showed up looking nervous. "Nora," she said, clutching her bag tightly. "I've been saving money, and I found a small apartment downtown. I think I'm ready to move out of the shelter." My heart swelled with pride. "That's wonderful, Grace. You deserve a fresh start." She smiled, tears welling up. "I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me hope when I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "Promise me something," I said. "When life gets hard, and it will, don't close off your heart. Don't let pain make you small." She nodded. "I won't." Because you didn't. When she moved out, the house felt quiet again, but not empty. Her laughter lingered in the air like sunlight through a curtain. I realized then that my story had come full circle, not because I got revenge, but because I learned to let go. The love I used to waste on people who took it for granted had found a home in those who truly needed it. I started writing again too, something I hadn't done in years. At first, just journal entries, reflections about what I'd learned, but soon it became more. I began writing stories inspired by the women at the shelter, by Grace's strength, by my own rediscovery of peace. One of the shelter volunteers read a piece I wrote and said, "You should publish this, Nora. It could help people." I laughed it off, but the idea stayed with me. Maybe my pain could serve a purpose after all. The days turned into months, and the seasons changed again. My garden bloomed in spring, and I felt a deep, quiet gratitude for everything that had happened, every betrayal, every heartbreak, every moment of clarity. Without them, I wouldn't have become this version of myself. Then one afternoon, as I was tending to my roses, I heard the sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway. I looked up and froze. A familiar figure stepped out of a car, clutching a bouquet of lilies. It was Emma standing there with tears in her eyes, as if time itself had led her back to me. And in that moment, I knew the past wasn't finished with me just yet. It was Emma standing at my door, holding flowers, tears already in her eyes. For a moment, I couldn't move. The sight of her standing there after so many silent months was like seeing a ghost from a life I thought I'd buried. She looked older, somehow tired, worn, her usual sharpness dulled by something that resembled humility. When I finally opened the door, she whispered, "Hi, Mom." I studied her for a long second before speaking. "Emma," I said quietly, "you look different." She smiled weakly. Life does that, I guess. There was a pause, one heavy with all the things neither of us had said over the years. I gestured for her to come in. She hesitated, then stepped inside, glancing around as if the house itself might judge her. The faint scent of lilies mingled with the aroma of fresh coffee. She handed me the flowers awkwardly. "I didn't know what to bring." "They're lovely," I said, placing them in a vase. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same one where so many of our arguments had begun and ended. But this time, the silence between us wasn't hostile. It was hesitant, fragile, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding but still ached when touched. After a few sips, she spoke softly. "I came to apologize, really apologize, not because I want anything from you, because I finally understand." I didn't answer right away. I just watched her eyes, searching for sincerity. For once, I didn't see calculation or defensiveness, just remorse. She took a body, shaky breath. "A few months ago something happened," she said. I got pregnant, but I lost the baby." Her voice cracked on the word lost. My heart clenched instinctively. "And after that, I kept thinking about you, about how I treated you, how I left you alone when you needed me. When I was in the hospital, no one came, not one person. I kept thinking, this is what Mom must have felt." I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. Her skin was cold, trembling. "I'm so sorry, Emma," I said softly. "No mother should ever have to hear her child say those words, but I'm glad you understand." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I do, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it out loud." We sat in silence for a long while after that. The clock ticked softly on the wall, marking the time between our breaths. "Eventually," she said, "I know you changed your will. I heard everything from Denise before she stopped talking to me too. I don't blame you anymore. You were right to do it." Her honesty caught me off guard. I studied her face, the rawness there. "I did it because I needed to heal, and I couldn't heal in a life where I was only valued for what I could give." "I know," she whispered. "It just took me losing everything to understand how much you gave." Her voice broke again. And this time, I didn't hold back. I stood and wrapped my arms around her, feeling her collapse against me in sobs that shook her whole body. We stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, both finally mourning what they'd lost years ago. Trust, love, and the illusion that either could exist without effort. When she pulled away, her eyes were red but clear. "I'm trying, Mom. I got a job. A real one. I'm saving money. And I'm working on myself. I don't want to be the person who hurt you anymore." I smiled gently. "Then don't be." She laughed softly through her tears. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," I said. But it starts with choosing better each day. That's all healing really is, choosing differently. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking. Not as mother and child, not as victim and offender, but as two women who had finally found the courage to face themselves. She told me about the therapy she was continuing, the friends she'd lost, the loneliness that had forced her to grow. I told her about the shelter, about grace, and how helping others had given me new purpose. For the first time, I saw in her not the entitled girl I'd raised, but a woman who had been humbled and softened by her own lessons. As the sun began to set, she stood to leave. "Will I see you again?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "But not because I have to. Because I want to." She smiled, a small, genuine smile that reminded me of her childhood. "I'd like that." At the door, she turned back. "Mom, I never said this before, but thank you. For everything. Even the hard parts." I nodded, my eyes warm with unshed tears. "Those were the parts that made us real, Emma." She left with a soft goodbye, the lilies still scenting the air after the door closed. I stood by the window, watching her walk down the path toward her car. The setting sun cast her shadow long across the driveway, and for a brief, beautiful second, it felt like the past and the present overlapped, the little girl running to me after school and the grown woman walking away to face her life. I didn't feel bitterness anymore. Just peace, the kind that comes when the story finally closes the way it was meant to. That night, I sat on the porch under the stars, the cool breeze brushing against my face. The house was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't lonely. It was whole. I thought of Richard, of the shelter women, of Grace and her new apartment, of Emma finding her way back not to my money but to herself. And I realized something profound. Revenge had never truly been the goal. It was just the doorway to self-respect. The pain, the silence, the distance it had all led me here, to a life where I was no longer invisible. My revenge had never been about punishment, it had been about truth. And in that truth, I finally found peace, the kind that no inheritance could ever buy.